I have recently started going to church. After touring 10 different area churches and making little TikTok reviews on them all, I settled on one where I started crying during the service. I think that's a good sign. During a breakout group last week, we discussed social issues for a policy advocacy group. What's keeping you up at night? If your tax dollars could go towards one issue, what would it be? We pooled answers, and the one common theme was housing. It's the major portion of many people's budgets, the major factor in homelessness, America's most visible social calamity. It's a major determinant of health, stress, and education. And with rising prices of houses and rents across the board, saying that we have a housing crisis isn't at all an overstatement. As we'll talk about shortly, this topic wording is, quite frankly, a mess. But as a topic area, it really couldn't be better. And now I present your March topic, a corporate ban of acquisitions of single-family homes. Last month, I announced that I am stepping away from Debatetrack to pursue another project full-time. So you may be surprised to see another Debatetrack lecture with me, and that is all thanks to Civic Debate Academy, who stepped up to carry on the work of Debatetrack to continue to provide high-quality, evidence-based materials to the public forum community. I know we have grown attached to each other over the years, but I have very good reason to believe that these lectures will continue to get much more useful to public forum debaters, and even better as we continue for the rest of the season and into the future. Now, your topic, starting with background. This topic wording is both important and difficult. A lot of times I just completely skip topic wording section because you don't need to be babied in different definitions about what's going on. I almost never talk about like US federal government. I assume y'all get that. I don't think maybe once or twice I've talked about the word should. Again, mostly don't have any conversations about it. I don't love talking about topic wording. I like the topic wording to be fairly obvious. I think everyone wishes that, right? The bane of public forum debates is topic debates. We don't want to have definition debates. We want to talk about the substantive issues, the AF arguments versus the neg arguments. That's what we want in a debate. And when the topic is worded well, that's what we get. Well, we don't always get good topic wording, do we? So pay attention to this section. I will try my very best to point out all of the issues that we will inevitably have. However, I do see this as a minefield of a topic, and I'm not able to diffuse any of these mines. I have seen the lay of the land, and as we walk through, I'll be able to say, hey, there is a mine. Try not to step on it. That's really the best I can do. But I haven't soldiered my way through this field. I haven't debated this topic. I'm not going to debate this topic. So all of these landmines on the field are really up to you to avoid. Again, all I can do is point them out. The resolution itself, I'm working from a new setup, so excuse my transitions. The United States federal government should ban corporate acquisition of single-family residences. Now, to be fair, when I first saw this topic, I was happy. And I thought, hey, fairly simple wording, fairly straightforward. All we want to do here is keep big corporations from buying up the houses that people are living in. And that seems like it could have some downsides, of course. But overall, it seems like it could be a good move, with some downsides, and so we should debate about it, It's really, the people versus corporations. It's sort of like the rights of the people, feelings about what's important. Again, housing is a human right, things like that, versus corporations. That's what I thought this would be about. And in fact, I think that's maybe what the framers' intent actually was. I think it was something like that. We should stop Blackstone and other huge corporations from buying up the properties in residential neighborhoods. That's what it seems like. This is, I think, what a reasonable topic writer would mean based on plain language, context, real world usage, not, cherry-picked definitions or history, any kind of obscure debates. Just stop the big old corporations from buying up people's homes. I believe that was the framers' intent. If only it were that simple. Let's start with the word ban. So a ban, of course, means you're not allowed to do it. In real life, there would be some carve-outs and exceptions, because there's many times when renting might be a good idea. And if you want to rent, you're going to have to rent from someone, or the only other choice is owning a home. And so a straight reading of this definition seems to just ban the concept of rentals, at least for single-family residences. So in real life, there are exceptions. We'll talk about that in just a little bit, but there is no explicit carve-out in this resolution. So if we want to add some kind of a carve-out, we are adding to the resolution or reading into it a little bit. You look at the most likely implementation of AF, it might have carve-outs. You could look at what, for example, the recent Trump executive order actually looks like. We'll talk about that in a bit of detail a little bit later. The recent executive order from Trump, it is a federal ban of sorts, right? And so, this topic could just be like, is this executive order good or bad? That could be one kind of framing. That's even if your topic wording committee is listening. I mean, that's a straightforward way we can turn this material around, turn the resolution around to be something debatable. Is the executive order a good thing or a bad thing? Now, of course, for a proper ban, we need to have a law, and that involves Congress. And so you can look at any of the congressional laws that relate to housing and say, again, this is the most likely implementation. Now, there aren't any congressional laws even proposed that are similar to the AF in that they ban corporate acquisitions of anything, including single-family homes. But there are some acts, namely the Homes Act and Hope for Homeownership Act, that tax, and sometimes tax heavily, investors of single-family homes. So maybe move in the direction of AF, if not actually ban it. Okay. Not too bad. Next word is corporate. Corporate one, because there's a lot to say about corporate. So my initial analysis is always semantics. What does this word actually mean? What does the word itself mean? Let's go from there, right? If we're defining things, let's define them. And so something that is corporate is something that is related to a corporation, right? There is a legal entity called a corporation. That would be an S corp or a C corp. That is what a corporation would be, semantically speaking. It would not be an LLC. An LLC is a limited liability company, not corporation, company, therefore not corporate, limited liability company. And what an LLC does is just protect you personally from lawsuits, essentially. Sometimes it makes things easier to manage. You get some, there's some tax related things involved, but just really makes your businesses easier to manage and shields you from some amount of liability, right? So let's say that you own a home, you're renting it out, you have an LLC, the home collapses and squishes a family of 12 and their 15 dogs, except for one little kid who crawls out of the rubble with broken legs and sues you for squishing his 11 relatives and 15 dogs. Horrible tragedy. If you didn't have an LLC, the court would then would throw you in jail, come after you, take all of your assets, your savings, your checking account, your stocks, your own home. With an LLC, it's not that you're not responsible for what happens in an LLC, but the court could only take the things that are owned by the LLC. So maybe other houses are also under the LLC or just the home and property itself. For that reason, a lot of landlords keep every home in their own LLC. So if there's any kind of a lawsuit, the most they can lose is that house itself. And obviously, everyone uses an LLC for business, especially with our litigation-heavy culture in America. It is very, very wise to legally protect yourself. I wish that wasn't the case, but that is the case. So, could you have a company that isn't an LLC. On the margins, if you just make a little bit of money, maybe, but almost everyone has an LLC for almost every business. That includes landlords. But technically, semantically, not a corporation, semantically speaking. So this differentiation between an LLC and corporation is absolutely useless. This is not a good way to break down the topic or real life, because you can have an S corp that does absolutely nothing. It's owned by one person. It does nothing at all. You can have an LLC that is worth billions of dollars, right? An LLC can hold another LLC. So if all of your houses, apartment buildings, whatever, are each their own LLC, that can be held by another LLC that is like a holding company for these other LLCs. And so the LLCs, again, can hold many things, be worth billions of dollars. And so it's not that LLCs are small and corporations are big. That is not semantically what is going on. Absolutely useless distinction. Mom and pop investors, again, according to framers' intent, I think these would not be included, but that's not what it says in the resolution. We don't get the luxury of that clarification. But you're just reading the resolution, it might include them. It might include any mom and pop investor. You own one home, included as a corporation, 2 homes, included as a corporation, 100 homes, included as a corporation, right? Again, we don't really have any differentiation there. So I think according to framers' intent, not included, but this is totally wide open for debate. Again, I don't have answers to this word. Again, mom and pop investors are almost all LLCs. So again, this is just not a useful way to break it down. However, this is the only bone I can possibly throw at you. However, you can be a landlord without an LLC. You can buy a house, it's under your name, you find someone to live in it, sign a rental agreement, they pay you cash or whatever, deposit every month, and they get to live in your house. That is possible. That's legal. In all 50 states, that is legal to do. Now, who would actually do this? Probably, that's all I can think is like maybe just someone in a small town, they inherit a house, that maybe they know their neighbors, they're just, that a friend is going to live there. They're not very educated, they're not like business minded in that way, they just own this home, like they're just, okay, fine, yeah, they're a landlord technically, but it's just Jared, who I've known all my life, who's just living in my house and paying me $500 a month. So yeah, technically a landlord, but this isn't, landlord like we're thinking of, where you're like professional, acquire as many properties as possible, milk all the rent you possibly can out of your tenants. It's just someone lives in my house. I don't know. That's possible. And so this is the only bone I can throw you. Like maybe those are excluded, right? That's not a corporation. If you just own a house, that's definitely not a corporation. You just own a house and just someone lives in it. Okay, you're a landlord. That's not a corporation. Mom and pop investors, what the literature all uses to talk about these bigger landlords versus mom and pops is institutional investors. Institutional investors. Another word that would be great in the resolution, because that's what all the literature actually uses to talk about the big ones, right? So these are definitely topical. If you want to talk about this on institutional investors on AF and EG, yes, absolutely, this is topical, this is golden. But even here, there's no clear line that says like, what is an institutional investor? Is it, I've seen numbers as low as 5 properties, like analyses where you say, okay, you're definitely an investor if you got 5 properties. But up to like 2,000 properties, like that's the line. And anywhere in between. I've seen specifically the numbers 15, 100, 1,000, and 2,000. Zakira 23 talks about some of this. Zakira 23 talks about this. So we don't really have a clear line to divide institutional investors from mom and pops based on the number of properties. Again, it would be a nice thing in the resolution to say, 100 homes, something like that, 1,000 homes. So now we have like 2 proper areas for the debate. The big 3 companies are Blackstone, which I referenced earlier. They changed their name to Invitation Homes, I think because they got a bunch of bad press. Some of that I think was maybe related to BlackRock, which is a different company, and also involved in real estate. Just confusing. Okay, so Invitation Homes, Progress Residential, and America Homes for Rent. Those are the 3 big companies. Another form that these investors can take is Do I have this in here? It's not in here. It's just not in here. Okay, it's a REIT, R-E-I-T, a REIT, a real estate investment trust, REIT, which is essentially an investment vehicle that allows fractional ownership of accumulated property. So theoretically, you could buy $10 in a REIT to start investing in real estate. It's like I buy 100 properties, I have this company, and we collect rent from all of these properties, and you can buy some stock in my my REIT, this holding of properties, and so you collect, as far as we keep collecting rent, you get some money from your investment, right? And so this is a common way to like bundle up the properties as investment vehicles. So you could like a retirement fund, a hedge fund could just buy some percentage of a REIT specifically for investments, right? It's not really for managing properties, it's specifically for investing in the properties. So that would also fall under institutional investors. You just turn it into like a commodity that you can trade, buy, sell. Okay, yeah, and the last way that we break this down, the ownership would be an owner-occupant, which is exactly what it sounds like. I own the house and I live in the house. And that's an owner-occupant. That's not an institutional investor or a landlord. I live in the house and own the house. I'm so sorry. Even then, even owner-occupants can put their home in an LLC. That is legal. That is, some people think that's the smart move to do. For whatever reasons. Again, I don't know if there's potentially tax reasons, but definitely liability reasons. So yeah, you can't even just say an LLC. Like maybe you have an LLC and you have one house and you live in that house and you're not trying to rent it and you're not trying to sell it. So just to add misery to this, the only clear definition that I've been able to find is Sequeira 25, not Zequeira, different person, Sequeira 25. Quote, researchers told State Line they define corporate ownership as any rental property held under a formal business entity, whether a single property LLC or large institutional investors such as Blackstone. So here's the only clear definition of the word corporate that I've been able to find in any of the literature. I believe this is the safest definition. However, of course, it would ban most landlords, except for the ones that don't have a company, that don't have an LLC. This is what this definition would do. It's essentially saying no more landlording single-family residences, except on the margins where you're going to have a lot of personal liability for those, so just very few people will do it. I think that's a clear definition. Leaves almost no ground for the AF, but I think it's at least clear, at least that. And so under this definition, it would leave two categories of rentals. Either they're owned by entities or they're owned by individuals. Those are the two categories. AF would say, let's ban the first category. Ban acquisitions of the first category. Speaking of acquisitions, here is your next word, acquisition. So this is not ownership, which means we're not banning having single-family homes or renting single-family homes or having single-family homes as investments. We're just saying you can't buy them now. You cannot acquire them. So existing landlords or property owners would not have to divest under the AF world. You don't have to sell all your homes, you just can't get new ones. However, this entrenches the market. It crystallizes the market. There's three big players. There will just continue to be three big players. Now, if they want to sell their houses and get out of the market, fine. But no new people can get into the market. If you're a small or medium, property investor, you can't grow because you can't acquire new houses. So existing sort of corporate power structures remain static, or at least one way. They remain one way because you can't get out of the market. So that's what acquisition kind of holds us to. But there are still, homes can come on the market still under a ban of acquisition. So you could buy multifamily units, including duplexes. So if there are houses that are just like stuck together, you got two houses, or apartment buildings with 4 apartments or 10 apartments or 100 apartments, those are all fine. I know I'm in Grand Rapids. There's there's a big historical neighborhood where the houses are really big, hard to maintain, expensive, and a lot of the people who historically lived there kind of moved to the suburbs. The population overall grew. The property prices overall grew. So to deal with the bigger population and increase prices, they turn all of these huge mansions into apartments. I think nearly every city in America has some kind of neighborhoods like this, historical neighborhoods, turn them into apartments. You can still buy those because those are not single family homes. Those are multifamily units. You could also still directly build to rent. And so we'll talk about build to rent at some point. And part of this business model would still be okay under F, which means if you're in the business of construction already or construction and renting, you'd have to have a business that is both constructing and renting. So you're making the houses yourself and then you're renting the houses yourself. That could still be allowed. Okay, that's acquisition. And then single family residence. So this means probably what you think it means, just standalone units. So you aren't sharing any entrances or facilities, garages, dwellings with other units. It's just you. So, like if you have a duplex or like I don't know what you call them, like a townhouse or something, where there's like two units, two or more units in one building, you'll like share the roof, for example. So you could, maybe you own it, but if you need to repair the roof, you gotta get together with your next door neighbor and figure out, because it's like a conjoined twin house, like it's the same roof, so you gotta work together to repair the roof, for example. So that would not be a single family residence. Under that world, we'd probably see a lot more of these. I don't know, maybe there's pros and cons to that. Maybe you know your neighbors better, I don't know. Again, not duplexes, not apartment buildings. That's the distinction, but also the distinction might be somewhat perceptual. I have this listed as Secura. It's not Secura, it's Applebaum. Applebaum 126 says, quote, last year, the home builder D.R. Horton completed a subdivision of 72 single-family houses outside Tallahassee, Florida, named the Cypress at Wesley Park. It rented the homes and then sold the whole thing to an investment firm called Topaz Capital Group. Nobody would even blink if it was a 72-unit apartment building called the Cypress at Wesley Park. Applebaum 126. So why are single-family residences special and better than apartments? Why do they deserve special treatment? That's something to debate, but that's what our topic is. And I don't actually have an issue with that particular wording. Single-family residence, that's okay. Okay. A couple more notes on background. So again, there is going to be different definitions in the literature about different things. So landlord, like a property owner who owns it to make money so they rent it out to people, that's called a landlord. It's also called a corporate landlord. It's also called an institutional landlord. So if you're debating on a definition of only one of these things, like big investors or something, like big companies that own a bunch of properties, the literature is going to be a little bit split on this, and it's not always clear. And again, even if they say institutional landlord, that could mean 100 units, 1,000 units, etc. So these are a little bit, definitions of landlord vary, definitions of renter also vary, because there's usually no distinction, or sometimes there's no distinction between a single family residence renter and an apartment renter. They're both renters. Sometimes those are distinguished in the literature and sometimes not. So varying definitions of these two things, watch that. Overall, the data is quite poor. This is Horowitz and Starling 24, quote, definitive statements about the impact of investor ownership of single-family homes are rare because it's difficult to gather foundational data on the subject. Overall data is poor. However, some areas are highly studied. This is certain cities where there's like institutions, universities that study their own city quite a bit. For example, there's a bunch of schools in Boston, a bunch of universities, and some of them have really, really good education programs, like the Harvard Education School, super famous. So Boston, public schools are wildly studied because you have all these institutions, all these universities studying the students and doing experiments and trying different interventions. Same with housing. So you're going to see Baltimore and Cleveland a lot in the data, just based on, I don't know, whoever's studying it. The most well-studied and referenced city is Atlanta. And that's from the Georgia Institute of Technology. They've just done a bunch of studies on that. So although the data is poor, the data is actually very good in like some cities. Now, this topic is national, not city specific. So sometimes you have to kind of extrapolate from this, from what you see in, for example, Atlanta. Okay, let's talk about the housing crisis. Now, for this, I'm going to use an explanation from Erdman 24, which I think is just very, very coherent, just very plainly puts into light why we have a housing crisis. When we say crisis here, we mean really the cost of housing. So rent prices are too high, and home prices are too high. Therefore, mortgage prices are too high. So just the price of housing is very high at the moment. And then you also, think about, layoffs from AI and, economic recession and stagnant minimum wage and just stagnant salaries in some places. You have housing costs taking up a bigger and bigger portion of the average American's budget. So that's the housing crisis. Before we give you just a ton of quotes from this guy, let me tell you who he is. Kevin Erdman is a senior affiliated scholar at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. He has engaged in research with Mercatus about housing finance, land use restrictions, and monetary policy. So just as a sample of what's to come in terms of bias, this whole section, the Erdman 24 housing crisis section, is all in the neg section. It's all a big neg card, but it's also just the most clear actual explanation of what's going on. Okay, so the issue to be addressed, quote, why are corporations now buying single-family homes? Such behavior is an anomaly, not a natural, inevitable result of corporate power. What then is the explanation? So before we give you the explanation from Erdman 24, a little bit about the 2008 financial crisis. So this happened in the US in 2008. So some of you were alive, but you're probably little babies if you were alive, so you probably don't remember it too well. And this is also referred to as the subprime mortgage crisis. The subprime mortgage crisis, what happened was between the periods of like the early 2000s, like say 2005, I've seen that number, to 2008, a lot of banks were giving out mortgages to people who shouldn't have mortgages. People had low credit, they didn't have a steady source of income, or they had too low income, and banks were just giving them loans anyway. Sometimes these loans were given out with sort of special deals where there's an intro rate, for the first year. The interest rate is 5%. Okay, I can pay that mortgage 5%, but the next year it raises to like 6.5%, and suddenly, a bunch of people can't pay their mortgage because their mortgage price jumps by $500 a month, for example. So this was a pretty common thing that was happening for a number of years before this crisis. Again, teaser rates were used to get people into loans that shouldn't have had the loans. A lot of these people were just not checked too well. At the same time, house values at some point stopped rising. So you're locked in this really steep mortgage. You can't refinance it for a better rate or with a different bank because maybe the amount you owe on the house is pretty much what it's worth. If the house prices rose, and it was now worth a whole lot more, maybe you could get another loan out, but maybe what you owe is pretty much what it's worth. At some point, people were underwater, which means they owe more than the house is worth. The second part of this wasn't just giving to people who shouldn't have a mortgage. If that was the case, maybe some of the people get evicted, the bank takes the home, sells it, has a loss, life moves on, bad financial decision. But the second part of this is securitization. Securitization is where you bundle a bunch of these mortgages together and sell them as what's called mortgage-backed securities. So we just talked about before a REIT where I own a bunch of houses, collect rent on it, and then turn that into a kind of a stock that you can buy, that you can invest in with, for example, $10. Same thing happened with these bundled mortgages, these mortgage-backed securities. So people would write the mortgages and then just sell these bundled mortgages all to maybe an investment firm, and then the investment firm would just collect money on the mortgages, and you could buy these. You could buy the mortgage-backed securities, sell them, trade them. And yeah, so investment firms bought them. Some like foreign banks bought them. A lot of like retirement funds bought them, because what's safer than just collecting mortgages from people? That's so safe. Help all these retirees to live nice lives in peace. That was sort of what happened. And the issue was, when all of these people stopped being able to pay their mortgages, all of that money dried up. The value of those mortgage-backed securities tanked, and therefore the investments tanked. Banks who owned these tanked. Retirement funds, with people's the money that they're using for retirement tanked. So people lost like a bunch of savings that they had planned to retire on. And same with other foreign nations who had bought, again, American mortgage securities should be super, super safe. So they bought these, and then the foreign banks tank, maybe the foreign currency tanks. Like it was really a massive crisis, a massive global crisis. And in order to make sure that the whole economy in America didn't collapse, there were bank bailouts where the US government gave a bunch of money to these banks. A lot of people got really angry about this, because how are our tax dollars being paid to banks because they wrote a bunch of bad loans to people? The bankers, by the way, of course get bonuses. No human being is punished. Just bankers make a ton of money and taxpayers pay for it. Now, the other side of the story is, of course, like if we just allowed the banks to collapse, like that would be really, really, really bad. So yeah, it's just like a horrible situation for everyone. But I don't know. Did anyone go to jail for that? I don't know. I think maybe a couple people. I think not enough people. So the 2008 financial crisis led to the Great Recession, which was very much a global thing. Again, there's this phrase, when America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. America is just so dominant in the economy, and so many other countries are tied to the American economy, that if something bad happens in America, like it's really, really, really bad for the rest of the world. You can look up stats about when foreign currency prices collapsed, foreign economies collapsed, how many people actually died as a result of this. Like the answer is many, because people essentially wrote bad mortgages. Now, again, there's more factors involved here, but the subprime mortgage crisis was really the major trigger for the financial crisis, for the global Great Recession. If you are confused, you can watch that again, and or watch this movie. It's called The Big Short. If you're watching this lecture in class, teach. Show them this movie. It's great. It's a great movie. It features Michael Scott from The Office. It's very entertaining. So that is the 2008 financial crisis. Back to Iron Men, back to why are our rent prices so high? Before the 2008 crisis, there were lots of lenders lending to borrowers, again, with bad credit scores. Now, the number here is 760. That's not actually a bad credit score. That's a fine credit score, but that's the dividing line that's used in this literature. But also with people with much worse credit scores, of course, like tons of people with much, much worse credit scores were getting loans. So lots of lending to borrowers with credit scores below 760. And then, okay, so let's walk through this. After the 2008 crisis, obviously, regulations tightened up. Okay, so again, the 2008 crisis was largely driven by people not being able to pay back mortgages. So after the crisis, tightened up regulations, bank gave out less loans to people with credit scores below 760. Now we begin some quotes. The profile of borrowers served by conventional lenders changed greatly after 2008. Those with credit scores under 760 were much less likely to qualify for mortgages, so the homes those borrowers were likely to live in had fewer potential buyers. These are people without great credit and finances. They tend to be cheaper houses in working class neighborhoods. Cheaper houses in working class neighborhoods, starter homes. They're starter homes. These homes had very few people who could buy them now, because banks weren't giving out money to these people anymore. Again, quote, in neighborhoods where mortgage access dried up, home prices collapsed. These people can't get loans. They're not buying these starter homes. The price of the starter homes collapse. Quote, Institutional owners were the only sector with the scale to purchase the number of homes that households could no longer buy under the new lending standards. All these houses get really cheap. Institutions with a ton of capital step in to buy them. That is the story. So it's not that these institutions bought them instead of people buying them. The people could not buy them. That's the whole point. There were not buyers for these homes. Institutions bought them. Okay, next step, quote, builders can't sell new homes when existing homes are too cheap. Another quote, when mortgage access dried up for families seeking to find affordable homes, the prices of these homes collapsed. Builders couldn't profitably sell new homes because existing homes were cheaper than new homes. Okay, so builders stopped building. Again, okay, new houses are going to cost more than old houses, right? Because they're newer, there's less, everything's, you're gonna have just like less maintenance issues, updated appliances, the paint is going to be shiny. More modern building practices, maybe more like lower energy bills because you got better insulation quality, whatever. New homes are better. So let's say you're shopping for a home and you have a choice. You can buy this home and it's 50 years old and $200,000. And then there's a new home and it's $220,000. You might say, yeah, okay, look, I got to pay 10% more for this house, but everything's like much nicer in the house, so I'll pay 20%, or I'll pay 10% more for the house. It's reasonable, right? But what if that's not the case? The new house is $220,000 and the 50-year-old one is $100,000, right? Suddenly, maybe you don't really care about that new stuff. Like now it's all about price. Like that's kind of a non-starter. Like, okay, we'll do a couple of repairs. We'll pay a little bit more for energy. We're buying the $100,000 house. And that's what the situation was in these starter home markets. And so nobody was buying these new homes, so builders stopped building them. You can't build these starter homes when there's no one around to buy them because the used ones are also cheap. It's not that, by the way, institutional investors bought all of them. There were still homes on the market that were just very cheap. Okay, if you're not following, it's okay. Just read this card or rewatch this section of the lecture. It is kind of complicated. I've been through this a bunch of times and I'm just barely grasping this complexity. But many of you are much smarter than me and you immediately understand everything I'm saying, which is great. Okay, quote, builders haven't been producing affordable homes below $200,000 because the prices of existing homes have been too low. The drop in prices was due to suppressed mortgage activity, not because of a decline in the demand for housing. Quote, and since home prices in affordable neighborhoods were too low, buyers purchased existing homes instead of new homes. Rents on existing homes had to increase until the prices of existing homes were once again higher than the cost of building new homes. So if your rent is much less than buying a house, you'll probably just keep renting, right? But if rent prices rise and then it's like, oh geez, I pay a little bit more and I get to own my house. Okay, now you're gonna go try to get a mortgage to buy a house, right? And so that explains why rents have increased so dramatically. And the last thing to help round this all out, quote, the historically low level of housing production has predictably been paired with an unprecedentedly high rent inflation, end quote. And also house price inflation. All of these, at least in these markets, these starter home markets, people just haven't been building homes. There's not enough of these homes. So even these starter homes, even these entry-level homes, these cheap houses in like not great neighborhoods, even those prices are very high because there's just not many of them around. All right, so that is the Erdman 24 housing crisis explanation about why rent prices are so high, why mortgage prices are so high, why we don't have enough supply of housing. Fantastic card. Next, COVID. So another thing just about how home prices are high. So you probably remember COVID. People stopped going to work, stopped going to school, stopped spending money, stopped kind of getting out there. The economy slowed to a halt. That's kind of bad. Politicians don't like seeing that. So one of the ways that we can get the economy moving again, speed it up a little bit, warm it up a little bit, is lower interest rates. Now people can take out money very cheaply, to, for example, buy a home. And so to do anything, whatever, to buy a business, to invest, but in this case, to buy a home. It was very cheap to buy a home because mortgage interest rates were very low. If you don't understand like what and all is going on with interest rates, why does it matter if it's 2% or 5% or 7%? It's also just a small percent. Actually, those percentages are because most of what you pay in a mortgage is actually the interest. It's like half of it. So let's say you buy a $300,000 house. Over the life of that mortgage, it's actually like a $600,000 house, rough numbers here, $600,000 house. Half of that goes to the bank in the form of interest, and the other half goes also to the bank, but just in the money that they fronted you. That was the purchase price for the home. So when that interest part grows, and like a couple percent is a huge chunk of that, your monthly mortgage payments are going to be much higher. And so, the difference between 3% COVID era mortgage and like a 7% current mortgage might be, you're paying $1,000 a month for a mortgage versus like $1,800 a month for mortgage or something. It's like, okay, the actual price that I have to pay every month is much, much higher. And so that's why you want a low interest rate, but I digress. A lot of people wanted to buy houses because they would get that lower mortgage payment, because the interest rates were low, because the government was handing out like free money from COVID to get the economy moving. And because everyone wanted to buy a house, that pushed house prices higher, because obviously there's more demand, same amount of houses pushes prices high. And especially, again, in the entry-level market, there aren't enough houses because we haven't been building, because no one was buying it, because those buyers couldn't qualify for loans, because banks stopped giving to them because of the 2008 financial crisis. So where are we in the status quo with our housing crisis? What kind of a crisis do we got available to us right now? Again, rent is very high. Why? There's not enough houses. Again, house prices are very high. Why? There's not enough houses. And also the COVID holdover. So these high house prices during COVID kind of maintained to some degree. So we still have like the effects of that. People are just willing to pay COVID prices because of like you get pegged against what you're used to, house prices have come down, in some places, depending on the market and everything, but still some holdover from that. So currently we have, according to Lee et al. 825, 6 million houses too few. In order to not have a housing crisis, we need 6 million more houses, which, for reference, is a lot of new houses. And so that's why there's not enough houses. Some of the impacts of this housing crisis, high rent, high mortgages, are obviously a lack of budget for other things. You can't spend money on transportation, education, entertainment, because all of your money is going to your mortgage. The rule of thumb is maybe you want to spend like a third of your income on housing, but as it creeps up, maybe you're not really being humble about your situation. You're living beyond your means. You have maybe too nice of a house, too big of a house, and the rent prices keep going up and the house prices keep going up and the wages aren't going up, and suddenly you just don't have money for these things. Also leads to housing insecurity, because on the margins, people are just not going to be able to afford the mortgage, not going to be able to afford the rent. They get evicted. Where do they go? This is housing insecurity. The next level down is like housing limbo, where maybe you are staying with friends, or maybe you're staying, a lot of people live in hotels. Shocking number of people live full-time in hotels. They work some kind of a job where they make some money, an Amazon warehouse, maybe they're a server, they make cash tips, and so they can go to that hotel and pay the $50 a night to live in that hotel. It's not a nice hotel. And they'll just live there for years and years and years. But they don't have credit, so they can't get an apartment. Maybe they have a felony, so they can't get an apartment. The apartments will look up, criminal records on you. Maybe they can't save up for the security deposit. You got to pay like 1 month up front. Like, who has that, $1,500 if you're in such abject poverty, So they just live in hotels. That's like, not homeless, but we're getting there. And then obviously homelessness. So a huge part of the housing crisis or the homelessness crisis is not having houses that people can afford. Like, that's not really rocket science. You can't afford a house. You don't have enough money for a house. You can't pay for a house. You can't have a house. You don't have a house. You're homeless. So I don't have cards cut for these things because, for these impacts, because I'm, as we'll talk about, not really sure AF can do anything about the housing crisis. At least not much. So to say like, okay, AF solves homelessness, like, I didn't want to cut impact cards that suggested that because I don't think it's true. Okay, let's look at some more stats. Most of these are from Lee et al. Thank you, Lee et al., for your contribution to statistics about housing. 9% of residential parcels are owned by a corporation in 500 counties that were studied by them, and that is as much as 20% in some cities. That is how do you say this? Sakara 25. That's Sakara 25. 9% are owned by corporations, but as much as 20% in some cities. Lee et al. 825 says 13.4% of all single-family residences are owned by investors of all sizes. So we have kind of different numbers from different people depending on the market, but I think, yeah, somewhere in the middle there, yeah, something like that. 13, 14, 15% is a good, general number. Well, I guess no. Between 9 and 13.4%, right? It probably just depends on how they measure it and where they actually measure. So somewhere in that 9 to 13% range of single-family residences are owned by investors of any kind. And most of them are not large institutional investors. Here's another issue with the statistics. You'll see, like, for example, 1% of 1% of single-family residences are owned by large institutional investors. It's very, very, very few. But that's the single-family residence is not the same as a single-family rental. Like, most single-family residences just have people living in them. And so are you counting all of the single-family homes out there or only the ones that are being rented out? Like, they own a percent of all of the houses or just the ones that people are actually renting out? In this case, it's just 1% of all of the houses are owned by large institutional investors. 90% of all investor home purchases are small and medium-sized investors. So yeah, vast majority of people who own and rent houses are small and medium-sized investors, maybe mom and pop investors, not these like huge corporations who own a very small percent of the actual housing market. And then talking about the future, like, where's this all going? Sakara 25 says the number is growing. Shaver 22 says 40% of all single-family rentals will be owned by institutions by 2030. So maybe mom and pop investors will be overshadowed by these larger institutional investors. Again, this is single-family rentals will be more dominated by institutions over time. But all of this ownership isn't spread out equally. There is a massive concentration of where they actually buy these houses. Again, we just talked about the housing, the collapse of housing prices that led to very cheap houses in cheaper neighborhoods, cheaper houses, starter homes. That's where they own most of the houses, and that's where the market share is concentrated right now. Other things that these institutions look for to make sure that they can always find renters, charge a good rate, etc., are transient populations. So people who like places where people come and go a lot are really good for that because you're always going to have renters in town and they don't really want to buy. So like college towns are great for that. You always have college kids to rent to, or, you know, places with a lot of business. Maybe there's, you know, business people that are coming in for a little bit. Around hospitals, you know, there's a lot of like traveling nurses and they might be there for 6 months or a year or something, but not want to buy. So these are the kind of neighborhoods they look for. 80% of all institutional investment occurs in just 5% of counties, 162 counties. 57% of counties in the US that they studied have no institutional investment. So tons of neighborhoods where they just have no interest in investing in. It's really concentrated on, like working class residential neighborhoods, usually in like the Sun Belt is where it's mostly concentrated, sort of south of the country. As far as politics, Trump, we'll talk in just a second about his recent executive order to stop corporate ownership of these single-family residences. And so he supports, obviously, a bunch of Democrats support it also. So here's one area where they converge, unlikely allies. Warren, Gavin, bunch of other Democrats have pushed for this. That's Ludden 126. Okay, so what's going on in the Trump executive order? There were some people worried on, like Reddit about whether this executive order nullified AF. Like, did the executive order, is that already a federal ban on single family residences? It's not really that extreme, but it definitely pushes sort of towards the AF. Again, it is an executive order. It's not a law. It's not a congressional law. And it's not an outright ban. So it's not the same as the AF, but it's, in that direction. It lays the groundwork. I'm going to read you some quotes from it, the ones that I think are the most important. But the full text is in the brief, so just read it if you're curious. But here's I think the ones that are important. Quote, to preserve the supply of single-family homes for American families and increase the path to homeownership, it is the policy of my administration that large institutional investors should not buy single-family homes that could otherwise be purchased by families. Okay. So focusing on single-family homes, focusing on large institutional investors. And to make that happen, what do we do? It mentions the FTC. Y'all know about the FTC, right? Attorney General and FTC should review transitions by large institutional investors of single-family homes and prioritize enforcement of the antitrust laws as appropriate against coordinated vacancy and pricing strategies by large institutional investors in local single-family homes, home rental markets. So he kind of says, like, look, Attorney General, FTC, you need to make sure that these large institutional investors are not abusing renters and coordinating in order to raise rental prices, etc. Make sure that they're treating people right. It also instructs the president's legislative chief of staff to prepare legislation to codify these policies so that large institutional investors do not acquire single-family homes. So there's a few other things, but in general, it's like directs the various federal agencies and his cabinet, like this legislative chief of staff, to push for stopping institutional investors from investing in these homes. And definitely cuts off, like, immediately all government support and loans to institutional investors for single-family homes, which in practice doesn't really happen much anyway. But again, it's an executive order. It's not a law per se. So it kind of is the AF, but it only carries so much weight, And again, it's not a ban. It's really not a ban per se. It's just like trying to limit it, trying to tap it down. Under this executive order, there are some carve-outs. So explicitly, there's a carve-out for build-to-rent homes, which again, we'll talk about later. He says for build-to-rent, no, like we can have an exception. And also says if the agencies should do research to make sure there's not other exceptions we should include. If you find anything else that we need to modify, like go ahead and include those as well. Make sure we're not like hurting the market too much. It implicitly, because it's just single-family residences, again, rules out apartment buildings. It also only talks about large institutional investors, which keeps small investors, mom and pop investors, in play still. So it is not as complete as we're maybe looking for the AF. There's some sensible carve-outs. Now, again, people are wondering about, do we have any inherency now? Is there actually a problem to solve? Again, there's no ban, and also probably a lot of these things aren't going to happen in the time frame that we're debating it. So if someone says, look, AF, you have no inherency, there's no structural issues that we're actually going to solve with your plan, so like, why are you proposing the plan? They won't be able to present evidence that this EO has made substantial changes. Just the timeline is too short. It won't have been enacted fully enough. There won't be enough changes that have happened in the real world. There won't be enough data collected on those changes. So for the timeline that we're actually debating, this EO doesn't really have many real world consequences. However, you may just want to argue, you might want to think of this resolution in terms of the executive order, harms, benefits. Again, like, will this EO make the world better? That's not what the resolution says, but that's a way I might think about it. If you're the wording committee, again, is listening, this might be an improvement. So again, it's not a full ban, and some people have a problem with that. Some people say it's not enough. The American Economic Liberties Project 26, quote, if the president were serious about lowering housing costs, he needs more than one-off sound bites and vague pledges. He must back a real ban on corporate investment in single-family homes and require divestitures, not just stop Wall Street from buying more, end quote. So AELP thinks that you also have to force all these large companies to sell their existing homes, not just stop buying more homes. So let's continue talking about next the topic wording. My thesis here is that, excuse my language and disrespect, I love the NSDA and the topic wording committee. I know you do try, I think, and I believe you're all volunteers. Maybe the NSDA could just hire a full-time topic person. Like, honestly, please, let's charge us all $2 more in our dues and get a dedicated topic writer. They work 40 hours a week on writing the best topics. Here's Jet Smith. He says, I think the NSDA needs to reword the topic to being benefits versus harms. Maybe they will. If they do, I'll release another little update video. This Reddit post, Tim Sheff, quote, you've identified where the absolute mess in the rounds will be. They could have defined size or purpose, rental, but we didn't get that clarification. So some approaches I might recommend. I'm not a debate coach, by the way. I just give lectures on these things. I'm not an actual debate coach, and I'm not your debate coach. So are these good approaches? This is all I got. This is all I have right now. I would assume there's no LLCs because, again, that was the most clear definition we got. That's something that if you can go in on AF assuming that this covers everything, this covers like any properties owned by any business entity of any kind, I think topically you're in the clear. Now, how do you possibly argue that topic? I don't know, but at least you're in the clear. So I would just assume we're not talking about any ownership at all. Landlording is effectively made illegal, but again, it could still preserve small landlords who are fully responsible for their properties, just not really serious people buying properties as rentals. So the way to think about this is, like, you rephrase the resolution as follows: the benefits of getting large corporations out of the single-family housing market outweighs the benefits of formal landlords providing single-family rental properties. A lot of benefits to people providing these rental properties. We're not going to have those anymore under the AF, but that's okay because we're getting these large corporations out, and that's a way that we could topically be in the clear. But again, we're just like giving so much ground to neg and taking away so much from AF. If this is really what the resolution was supposed to be, you could also just say the U.S. federal government should ban the rental of single-family homes. But again, I don't think this is what they were intending. I don't think this is the framers. I don't think it's what they had in mind. So that's why they wouldn't write it like we're just banning rentals. But again, that leads me back to my thesis, which is that this topic wording sucks. Okay, so I would prepare, if you're on AF, I would prepare for neg saying, this includes all landlords. And as AF, you can say, that's abusive. We have no grounds here. That's clearly not what the framers intended. We need to debate like something serious, and we need to include, AF would obviously still preserve mom and pop landlords. When we talk about corporations, what almost everyone thinks about is large companies, large institutional investors. Obviously, that's what we're talking about here. That would give AF like a reasonable ground, and if you can provide something, provide like a good framework and some defense against neg saying it includes everyone, I think that would give you a very good starting point. And then for neg, prepare for AF saying it's only the big landlords. We're obviously only talking about large corporations. For neg, you can say like, look, you're reading into this way too much. That's not what the resolution says. That's what you want it to say. That's not what it says. Just read the words on the page, please. Let's debate what the NSDA told us to debate, not what you wish it was. I would prepare for these scenarios. I think they're both going to come up. I would recommend that you don't set a bar on the number of houses unless you are in the topic wording committee. This resolution could be wildly improved by just giving us a bar, saying 100 units or 1,000 units or whatever. I would not include that as a debater because it's just too slippery and there's just too many sources all over the place. Final thoughts. There's a couple posts on Reddit about it. There's some people have commented on strategy. You can look there if you need more ideas. If you have more cogent thoughts about this, if you're listening to the lecture and being like, what is this guy rambling on about? Like, it's obvious, it's just this, we just do it this way. Like, that's obviously how we do it. It's not really a problem at all. This guy's going on at length about absolutely nothing. Please write it in the comments. Please help us all out. Leave a wonderful comment. If you're watching the video right now, go and read the comments. See if anyone has left something helpful. If you got something helpful, please leave it. And finally, again, if they change the wording, I'll release an update video with sort of the implications for going forward. They've done that in the past. They don't do it every time. There's no obligation on the NSDA to change the wording. Okay, so we now go to a section which in my many years of doing debate, I have not talked about because I have rarely, I don't know if this is the worst bias topic I've found or close to it, but, final recommendation for AF, forgot about this. Final recommendation for AF, don't try to say that AF solves the housing crisis because it just doesn't. And to give you a little preview, here's part of the NEG presentation about just the solvency. Like AF has no solvency on rental prices, housing shortage, and NEG can point to very clear other causes. And also we need like a very, the housing crisis is a complex crisis. So we need complex solutions, all of the above, as Terpene 22 says. So I just don't think you're going to get anywhere on AF going for solves the housing crisis, solves rental prices or whatever. This topic is so AF biased that we need to talk about, I'm going to talk about picking up hotties at the bar. That's how biased this topic is. That's what it has driven me to. Frame control. If this subtitle, if you get it, you need to get off TikTok. You need to delete TikTok from your phone and throw your phone in the ocean. Don't throw your phone in the ocean. It's polluting, but throw it, I don't know, in a wood chipper or something. Throw away your dang phone. Frame control. So we talk a lot about like framing in debate or a framework, and this is the logical priorities that you're setting out up front. Like, these are the most important things that we're talking about. If you don't stick to my frame, you're just talking about something irrelevant. Like, these things are not important. Like, here's what we should really be thinking about this through. It's like a logical, like boundaries, parameters for the resolution. Like, for example, a reasonable framing for this resolution should be, like tackling the housing crisis. It's a crisis and we need to solve it. That's like a fine phrasing. If your main thing is about like the lumber prices, like if the institutions stop investing, like what will happen to the lumber prices? Like, that's a really weird framing. Like, how are the lumber prices more important than the housing crisis? So that's what would just be a weird frame. Although I didn't think about that at all. Maybe if people stop building houses, it'll save the rainforest. I don't know. Did not think about that. Frame control is something that's, I think, maybe not talked about much. I don't even know how to teach it. I've tried before to like transform shy little students into, powerful, confident, energetic giants, and I don't know how to do it. So I'm just going to talk about it, and if it resonates with you, I hope it helps. But I don't actually know the voodoo about transforming kids. Maybe you got to walk on flaming hot coals or something. Maybe it's one of those things. Frame control is the absolute attitude that you are correct in a given situation. A strong frame is having such a strong attitude that you are correct that your competitor cannot change your belief. They're unable to. They try to say, hey, but what about this? And it just doesn't mean anything to you. You just don't care. They're unable to get into your frame. They're unable to break your frame. They're unable to make you question if you're right or not, because you obviously are. I mean, you can imagine if someone tried to convince you that, you're a dog. That someone tries to convince you, like, you're actually not a person. You're actually a dog. Look at how hairy you are. You're actually a dog. Like, at best, I mean, it might, like, obviously it's not nice for people to call you names. Like, maybe it doesn't feel good. But at best, like, you might just laugh at them. Like, what are you talking about? Like, are you insane? Are you all right, man? Like, what's wrong with you? You wouldn't be like, oh, really? Like, maybe I am a dog. I didn't ever think about that. That's why I'm so fuzzy. I have problems in math class. It's because dogs can't do math good. That wouldn't happen to you. You definitely have a strong frame, probably, hopefully, about being a person, being a human being. Like, yeah, for sure I'm a human being. Definitely I'm a human. No one can say anything to convince me I'm not a human being. Like, that's something I'm pretty sure of. What if you can have the same absolute confidence in your position in a debate? And I'm specifically talking to AF, but honestly, this applies to both sides of any debate. How can you get in that mood where it is impossible for Neg to tell you that corporations should have anything to do with buying houses? Can you get into that frame of mind? Now, framing and frame control pair together, you have a very good logic, and then emotionally, your mind is absolutely convinced of this logic to the point where nobody can break down your energetic barriers. I want to give you a few examples. But first, just generally emotionally, what this looks like: you are calm, you're not reactive, you're not emotional, especially the things people say. You're relaxed. You have very low anxiety. If you have low anxiety in general, it looks like confidence, and you have confidence that looks like you're competent. It looks like you know what you're talking about if you have low anxiety. People trust you if you have low anxiety. The judge, in their lizard brain, will trust you. On the margins, this will win you debate if you're calm. If you have low anxiety, you're very confident. You're absolutely sure of yourself. There's nothing, you're unflappable. There's nothing they can say that will change your mind out of your frame. In some situations, it might look like having some swagger, being a little bit cocky, hearing what you want to hear, ignoring what you don't want to hear, or reframing what you don't want to hear. People say something and you're just like, okay. I know it's like you're talking to a child. You got to explain, like, okay, you obviously don't get what's going on at all. Misinterpreting words to match your reality. I'm talking about like some borderline psychopathic behavior, but it can help you win debates. Don't be a real life psychopath, please, but do be confident. So some examples. So sometimes when you go to the club, which I hope you have no experience with because you're in high school, sometimes people go to clubs to make friends. They go to a club and they want to make a new friend. And some of these new friends are very popular, and everyone wants to be their friend at the club, but maybe like you have your own frame. You're not buying into their frame. Let's move on. I should cut this section. Sales. So this is a very, very common. I think this whole thing of like having a frame, keeping a frame, a lot of it comes from sales, business. So you're in a sales meeting, a business meeting, you're trying to get the job, get the contract, get the sale. Your logical frame, I would be, or my product would be such a massive contribution to their business. They would be so lucky to have me. They would be so lucky to be able to buy my product. Implementing my service would just be wildly good for them. So even if they like reject me, even if they're like, well, I'm not sure, blah, blah, blah. Look, I want the best for these people. I will give them another chance. I'll give them a second chance. I'll give them a third chance because I don't know if they know what they're talking about. I will try to help them along the way to kind of understanding how massively this will impact their business, how incredible of an employee I would be to have. But I'm calm. I'm not relaxed. They say something that sounds like maybe a criticism or an insult, like, look, bro, I don't have to be here. I don't have to be in this job interview. Like, I can be hanging out with my friends, like, I'm here to help you. Like, hire me, and like, give me a job offer, maybe I'll consider it. You know, that's kind of like the cocky, confident frame. Maybe I'll consider your job offer. Maybe. I'm not sure. So they say, look, you're really asking for a lot of money. You're really asking for a high salary. You're not like, well, I don't know if it's that high. I mean, I looked at some market analysis. This is a standard rate for this job. No. Yeah, it's pretty high. I mean, I'm really good at my job. I'm absolutely better than anyone else you're interviewing. I mean, look at my numbers. The numbers don't lie. I have a very good track record. According to the numbers, I'm going to return a salary like this ROI to you in 2 months. You know, the rest of the 10 months of the year are just upside for you. You can probably find someone cheaper. Can you find someone better? No. Can you find anyone more valuable for your company at this rate? Absolutely not. I mean, there's not a chance. Borderline psychopathic. We value our culture very highly, and we want to make sure you're the right fit. And we're really not sure you're the right cultural fit for us. Again, if they break into your frame that you're the best, you know, you might start to try to qualify even yourself, right? Talking about how you really are a good cultural fit. Like, actually, you know, I worked at a company that was very similar, and we had a very similar culture, and I really think I can be a great contribution. Wait, take a step back. Like, wait, you think I'm not a great fit for your culture? What is your culture like? Because that's actually very important for me. I'm very happy you're thinking about that. There's a lot of companies I probably wouldn't be they really wouldn't be a good fit for me. So I'm curious, like, what are these cultural things? And we'll see if, like, maybe we can have a match here, you know? Like, you're interviewing them, they're not interviewing you, right? Borderline psychopathic behavior. So, yeah, just some examples. I hope this is like starting to make a little bit of sense. Doesn't, again, mean that you can implement it so well. So the absolute best person at frame control, obviously, is our current president. The attitude, you know, like he won the lizard brains of America with his debates, where his attitude is clearly like, who cares what they think? Like, these are children. These are energetically, like, these are children. Like, I don't, like, if anything, I'm just talking down to them. I'm the coolest. I'm the best. Unfettered confidence. I'm actually right, and you are below me. I will now show some examples of Trump on the debate stage.
For example, you're the only person on the stage that's ever been fined for hiring people to work on your projects illegally. You hired some workers from Poland.
I'm the only one on the stage that's hired people. You haven't hired anybody.
Well, in fact, some of the people
and by the way, different plans. You'll have competition. You'll have so many different plans.
But now he's repeating himself.
No, I'm not repeating. No. Talking about the polls, I'm beating him awfully badly in the polls.
But you're not beating Hillary. So you're not beating Hillary.
Well, then if I can't beat her, you're really going to get killed, aren't you? In all fairness, Marco is not a negotiator. I watched him melt down, and I'll tell you, it was one of the saddest things I've ever seen. He's not going down.
He thinks the Palestinian is a real estate deal.
And these people may even be tougher than Chris Christie, okay?
The Palestinians are not a real estate deal, Donald.
Okay, no. A deal,
they're not a real estate deal.
Is a deal. Let me tell you,
a deal is not a deal when you're
borderline psychopathic behavior. So now, finally, let's go to talk about the AF. Your goal here is to ooze self-assurance. Ooze it. Ooze the self-assurance out of your pores to the judge, so that all that they want to do emotionally is vote for you. You're so confident, you're so unflappable, that they just want to vote for you. They just have to let their logical mind come up with a reason to write that down on the ballot. But they are going to vote for you. Their heart wants to vote for you. If they are like a strict flow judge, maybe their emotions are not going to win out. But on those margins, again, like maybe you get a 10% better chance at the ballot. Ooze self-assurance. Don't let the opponent break your frame. So the logical frame is something like, and I mean, you could have a lot of these different frames. I would think about it and try to meditate on it. I'll give you some examples of like mantras you can use even before the round to just be sort of almost meditating on this frame. One of these, we need to protect tenants from corporate landlords. We need to protect tenants from corporate landlords. They need protection from corporate landlords. So Neg says, corporate landlords actually provide a lot of value in terms of apartments. we need to be protecting from these people. What are you talking about? You legitimately want the law to just let corporate landlords eat the tenants, just steal their money, steal their wealth? Am I understanding this right? I feel like I'm not understanding this right. Like, what's going on here? So they say, yeah, corporate landlords provide professional management and maintenance. Yeah, they are absolutely professionals. Unfortunately, they're professionals. They're professional extractors of value from people, from human beings. Our fellow Americans are being professionally squeezed by corporate landlords. When 10% of your revenue goes to Wall Street dividends instead of repairs, that's not service, it's a business model. It's not a home. Housing is for living in, it's not for money. They're professionals. They provide professional maintenance. Yeah, sure. They're professionally optimized to squeeze 30% rent increases out of their customers. It's absolutely professionals, but I mean, the most evil kind you can imagine. They say corporate landlords are actually doing a lot to increase the housing supply, and they do a lot of investment in homes. Sure, they increase the supply of rentals, which means they're getting money by eliminating the supply of ownership. You can't build generational wealth without paying rent to a hedge fund. What are they investing in? Algorithms to maximize rent extraction. Absolute conviction here. Absolute matter-of-fact conviction. Like, the attitude is almost, it's like, it's ridiculous we're even here. Even though this topic is so neg biased, you're like, in your mind, it's just so AF biased. It's like, it's so impossible for neg to win. Like, I almost feel bad for you. Like, are you really, you're going to be defending like corporate landlords here? Is that the side you got stuck with today? I'm so sorry you got stuck in the position that you're having to fight for corporate landlords. You got a bootlick. Don't say that. Don't use that word in a round. That's not going to win you points, but that's the attitude. Like, how do you just get stuck on this wrong side? I'm so sorry. Some mantras, literally some mantras you can say right before the round to get yourself in the right headspace. Corporations exist to extract value. If a corporation owns a home, it extracts value from the living human inside of that home. Homes are for people, not for money. Corporations don't live in homes, people do. That's one exercise. I mean, literally repeating these things to yourself. If you find that helps you to emotionally keep your frame. If it's like weird and distracting, then maybe don't do it. But that's the only exercise I can possibly think of. Maybe your coach has better ideas. Okay. What a long video. Where are we at? We're at 78 minutes and we're just getting to arguments. Do I have enough battery? I got enough battery. You got it. We got our extra battery pack plugged in. All right. Thankfully, these sections are, or not thankfully, I don't know. Let's talk about affirmative. So we just talked about emotional control of framing. Let's start by giving you some actual logical frames you can embody in this debate. I'm not talking about neg at all because, like, objectively, they have too much going for them. I'm trying to concentrate on F here. Frame number one, housing is a human right. Terpene 22, quote, housing is a human right. People have more of a right to housing and being a part of a community than a landlord does to make a profit. More right to housing and being a part of a community than a landlord does to make a profit. So you can think of water, the example of water. Neg might say, look, housing is just about investments, it's about the free market, it's about money, it's about investing. There's landlords, there's REITs, there's retirement funds. This is just the general market, this is capitalism. Let the money flow, let the investment flow. If you're talking about like chocolate bars, I think, look, fine. If you're talking about houseplants, like maybe. If you're talking about like selling beer or something, like whatever. But we're talking about houses here. This is like a basic fundamental thing that people need, and we need to treat it as the human right that it actually is. So think about a different thing that you would naturally consider a human right, like food or water. So take water. If a company could buy all of the water in America, because they have the money and they're investing in it. And they make statements, right? They're like, some people prefer bottled water. And look, you look at the Great Lakes, we just bought all of the Great Lakes, and actually they were all really dirty. They all would make you sick. People were drinking water out of the Great Lakes and they were getting parasites. They were getting Lake Superior parasites. Now, we as Nestle have bought all of the Great Lakes and we're cleaning it. We're providing a public service. We're helping people. We're helping people by providing a public service to make water clean. We're improving the water quality. So we're just going to buy all the water to help everyone as much as we can. Would that be okay? Would it be okay for a corporation to buy all the water because they're making it cleaner? Because they're providing a service? They're helping the economy? Probably not, right? Is it right for corporations to buy all the water just because they can buy it? No. So here's your mantras for housing as a human right. People over profit. Housing is more important than money. Frame 2, financialization. I had those mantras written down. Look at that. Look at that. Financialization. Housing should not be tied to money. When houses become financial instruments, it leads to market instability, e.g. the 2008 financial crisis. There's too much systemic and financial risk to be securitizing and financializing housing. Given the slow-moving car crash that is the current US dollar, it is absolutely the time to remove this thorn in the side of the US financial system. We need to take this big player of securitized housing, financialized housing out of play. We need to make sure that people are just living in them. We're not trading housing markets, right? Again, we know how this story ends. We saw it end horribly recently. Recently, 2008, we saw how this ends. Have we not learned from the history of, like, fairly recently? It's almost 20 years ago. It's not that recent, right? So again, yeah, we're in a bad situation with the US dollar. We actually are. Look at the price of gold and silver through the roof. You can say that's because gold and silver prices are rising. People are understanding they're a great investment. Another way you can look at that is no one wants to hold US dollars anymore. US dollars are dangerous. They're toxic. No one wants them. Look, India is friends with China now. Like, that's not what we've been, that's not the state of the world that we have known in the debate community for years. In the poli-sci community, we have known that they don't like each other. They got good reasons to not like each other. And now they're friends. And obviously China wants to be dominant in terms of the renminbi. That's not good. Canada, they're like cool, like Canada is cool with China now. They're chill with China. They're cool with China. That's where the US dollar is right now. We need to stop this. Here's your mantras. We've tried it before and it broke the system. Not everything needs to be gambled on, which is what stocks are. Wall Street should not have its hands in the homes of American families. If you can keep this as your energetic frame, if you have a case built on something like this, right? Don't just like say mantras and go into the debate. Like, have a good case that ties into these things, you know? Last, are we going to talk about another one? We did not delete this one. Owning a house is good. It leads, for the individual and family, it leads to wealth accumulation. You have stability in your housing. You have a place to call home. For communities, it gives us a chance to, communities themselves a chance to exist. It gives owning gives residents a chance to shape neighborhood character, to invest in their property, to care about their neighborhood. Like if you're just renting for a year, maybe you don't care if there's trash on the ground. If that's your property, that you are definitely gonna live there forever, maybe you're gonna die in that home. Maybe you're gonna be here you're gonna raise your kids in this home. Maybe you're gonna be here for 20 years. You're gonna care about the trash on the ground. You're gonna try to maybe pick that up, talk to the neighbors about it, know your neighbors. You're gonna care about it. So, gives community a better chance. And then the nation overall, end the loneliness crisis, form stronger, more resilient communities. I don't have cards cut for this, but the literature on ownership is very sound. So here's your mantras. People need a place to live, and places need their people. Owning is the antidote to disconnection. Things I recommend you do not go for in terms of frames, again, are solving housing, lowering prices, increasing supply, I just don't think you have a whole lot there for you, unfortunately. All right, let's continue with F, talking about economics. So in terms of investments, there's been $60 million invested after 2008. Corporate landlords have invested tens of billions into properties that exploit renters in low-income markets. That's NOR24, quote. NOR24, by the way, great to say. Quote, in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, some 5.7 million homeowners lost their houses. Institutional investors saw an opportunity to buy houses at a steep discount. At least 25 institutional investors made investments in single-family real estate totaling $60 billion. And corporate landlords have not been idle. The period since 2011 has been marked with acquisitions as the new SFR market has consolidated. Corporate landlords do not buy just any houses that come on the market. They focus on the strike zone of cheap housing in areas of high rental demand, end quote. So just massive amount of money has gone into that, into the single-family residence market. What has that led to? Well, higher rent prices. Higher rent prices, these have been surging in local housing markets, according to Hingham and Singer 26. Corporate landlords specifically try to maximize profit. So the corporate ownership of these houses leads to larger rent increases and larger fees paid by the residents. So overall, just way more money out of the pockets of standard normal Americans and into the pockets of Wall Street corporations. NOR24, quote, corporate landlords have varied efforts to maximize their investment returns. This includes charging for late payments, smart home features which tenants may not want to or even use, and chargebacks for utilities paid by the landlords. Corporate landlords also shift maintenance costs back to tenants and charge a fee for that too. I lived in one house a couple years ago where I was charged a washer fee for like the clothes washer. There was a washer in the house and they said you got to pay for that. It's in the house, but you got to pay for it. If you don't want to pay for it, we're going to take your washer. That's kind of crazy, right? Conley 24, quote, extrapolate the 6 largest corporate landlord companies brought, does this make sense? Extrapolate the 6 largest corporate landlord companies brought in close to a combined $300 million of increased profits in the first quarter of 2024, with the profits mostly stemming from rent hikes. So they have actually made, I don't think the word extrapolate there belongs in there at all. I don't think it does. The 6 largest corporate landlords brought in close to a combined $300 million in increased profits in the first quarter of 2024, with the profits mostly stemming from rent hikes. So they're making record profits because they're raising rent prices. That's the reason. So we can see this very, very clearly. $300 million, by the way, in one quarter. So if that was over the course of a year, that would be $1.2 billion of extra profit that is going from normal Americans to big companies owning all these houses. Overall, again, quote, in the US, rent prices have skyrocketed by 31.4% since 2019. So like rent prices have increased by like a full third. They're making a ton of money. That's what we get when you get corporate ownership. Okay, next, rentlining, which is derived from the term redlining. So I don't want to talk about redlining at length because it's just not a good concept, but it's a very popular concept. The concept is, so back in the day, 100 years ago-ish, there was a big financial institution that drew maps of cities based on where banks should give loans to, right? So they had this is the green area. This is very safe. You can give loans to them for houses. Whatever orange area, double check everything, but sometimes it can be fine. I don't really know what all the colors were, but the red areas were like, don't give loans to these people. It's super risky. And a lot of the people who lived in these super risky areas were black people. And so the black people didn't get mortgages. They couldn't buy houses. They couldn't build generational wealth, or not even generational. They just couldn't build wealth, even throughout their own lifetimes. And therefore, because, all of the money was going to landlords and not to accumulating wealth in a home, they were never able to build this wealth and therefore got stuck in the neighborhoods, stuck in poverty. And then many of the bad neighborhoods from 100 years ago, you look at a map, it's the same bad neighborhoods now in every city, right? And that's because these maps were explicitly drawn with red lines to say don't give loans to these people. And so these neighborhoods, which are like high minority neighborhoods, just get stuck in these like terrible cycles of poverty. That did kind of happen. It's like way more complex than that, but that's like the simple story people like to tell. It's actually just not a useful it's not a useful concept of the world. So don't like start thinking of the world in those terms, or just like read a lot about it, and then you'll start to understand all the nuance, and then it's a little bit more helpful, obviously. But anyway, that's redlining. So rentlining is doing the same thing, but from institutions, right? Again, we already talked about how these institutions buy houses in working class neighborhoods, cheaper houses, starter homes, buying up all the properties, out competing potential owners for these properties. And the same thing happens that now if you're competing against these institutions, so the only choice you have is to rent the house, the same thing ends up happening. It's not a red line on a map, but it's an institution that's just out competing you with money in the same neighborhoods with the same results. So that's the idea of rentlining. Institutional housing investment is highly concentrated in neighborhoods where investors are more likely to maximize their pricing power. Harmon et al. 20. Quote, housing investors are not randomly acquiring properties across the nation. Instead, they are selectively acquiring properties in neighborhoods to maximize their pricing power. This purchasing strategy, sometimes called rentlining, entails buying homes that are more likely to permit rent extraction from tenants who lack options. This, end quote, and according to Lowry 25, this rentlining specifically targets low-income, high-minority neighborhoods where residents often can't afford a down payment, they can't afford to buy a house. Corporations come in, swoop them up, and just take the money from these residents. So this has a number of social costs. The financialization of the housing market. It's not there, it's supposed to be there. The financialization of the housing market causes social problems, including displacing communities, exacerbating racial disparities in housing, and flouting federal moratoria on evictions. That's all NOR 24. The community aspect, we already, of course, touched on that. If you're in a place temporarily, you don't own the place, you might only be there for 6 months or 12 months or something, you're just going to care about your neighbors less, care about your community less, put more work, less effort into your community. Again, exacerbates racial disparities. Malone 23 talks about how in Atlanta, Black residents have lost more than $4 billion in home accrued wealth over a 10-year period due to investor home purchases. So $4 billion in Black wealth that was not accumulated because of investor home purchases. This is just in Atlanta. I mean, Atlanta is huge, granted, but this is one city. I don't know how you properly extrapolate that to the nation, but like we're looking at big numbers here if you were able to do that. All right, last for AF, uniqueness on the word corporate. Like, why are we picking on corporations versus maybe mom and pops? Again, this will all depend on how you work out that minefield, how you work out those definitions. But if we did want to pick on large companies, this is why. Large corporate landlords are worse in terms of evictions. They tend to evict people more, use evictions as a threat also, more than small mom and pop landlords. Be more strict about their rules. Maybe a small mom and pop landlord might know the tenants. Maybe give them a little bit of leeway, a little bit of help here and there. You're a week late. Okay, just make sure you give me the money by Tuesday. Corporate landlords are not going to do this. So in one study in Boston, Harmon et al. 20 found 45% of all evictions were due to large corporate landlords, even though they only represented 32% of rental units. So just way more likely to evict people. Now, of course, if the word corporate meant any company, then they would be responsible for 100% of evictions. But yeah, if we're just talking about large companies, they're still overrepresented. So these big corporate ones are like worse. And then another big thing is opaqueness. Corporate landlords famously mistreat tenants and use opaque legal structures to avoid accountability. This is according to Fair 21. So corporate landlords, they'll have an LLC. Maybe it's hard to get in touch with an LLC. Maybe no one answers you. Maybe they lie to you over the phone. maybe they live in a different state or a different county. They require you to pay fees or to resolve disputes at their offices, which happen to be located 40 miles away from you. There's like all of these things that corporate landlords can do to avoid taking any responsibility for repairs and maintenance, pests. Just make sure they can, just take your money and not provide you good housing, and that's that. And that's really possible with these really large corporations where there's just so much bureaucracy, complexity, and a lot of it very, very intentional, opaque legal structures so that they can't get at you. You can even like hire a lawyer and it's going to be very difficult for them to work their way through. Obviously, for tenants in like cheap housing where they're kind of relying on these corporate landlords, they don't have lawyer money. So it's a good way for them to hide from responsibility. And they also cause unique harms. Again, NOR 24, quote, the corporate form allows landlords to hide behind veils of anonymity, using LLCs to turn on its head the ability to hold accountable the actual human beings responsible for decisions that play a critical role in determining housing outcomes for millions of households. Likewise, many corporate landlords are purely profit motivated and focus on shareholder returns. These distinct incentives militate in support of separate regulatory schemes. So NOR 24 here says we have to treat them differently. There is a reason that they're unique. There's a reason that we're talking about them uniquely. NOR 24 agrees. Corporate is the right word in this resolution. All right, that is what I have for AF. Last point would be that if you want to stick to what's actually really, really, really true, that I think is super defensible, I think these are kind of what you have. That on the margins, corporations do price out some homeowners in low-income neighborhoods because without these corporations investing, without these large corporations investing, some homes would stay on the market longer and then prices might drop. And then again, at the margins, some people would be able to buy these homes. And because there's so much market concentration on very particular neighborhoods and very particular parts of the country, mostly working class areas of the South, in some of these neighborhoods, rent and house prices may also drop without corporate involvement. So these things seem very, very, very true. I think it's very hard to weigh these against everything Neg has going for it, which we will take a look at now. But these are the things I could say are like 100% defensible as far as AF goes. So I guess just final word for AF, good luck out there. Okay, now we move into the longer Neg section. This lecture is already either the first or maybe second or third longest debate track lecture ever. But I guess it's all of the rants and asides I've been doing. AF didn't take much time. Neg has some great arguments, so let's go. First, I already gave you a preview of this, but general solvency. So if AF has any thoughts about solving housing or any of the factors of housing, I want to squash those right away. So let's talk about this is really defense, but maybe offense, defense kind of a thing. Album 26 talks about the housing shortage and how banning institutional investors is just an absurd way to try to fix this problem. Quote, landlords are not the cause of the nation's housing crisis, and any plan that reduces investment in housing is only going to make matters worse. The crisis is a simple problem with a complicated solution. The problem is that the United States does not have enough housing. The hard part is building more. The way to make housing more affordable is to build more housing. Then on rental prices, we have Erdman 26 again. Rental prices, they say, are high primarily because 1, there's not enough affordable housing supply, and 2, there's not enough buyers of affordable housing who qualify for mortgages. We hit on those points in the long explanation of how we got to the housing crisis in the status quo. Next is the simple factor of illegal immigration, a known cause for an increase in prices across the board. You have 10 million illegal immigrants crossing the border under Biden. Simple economics point to this as a factor in the housing crisis. That's Anthony 24, not in fact NOR 24. I've got a couple mistakes in here, sadly. Anthony 24. for. There's another card that I just cut on rent prices going down, actually, Yardy 26, that talks about rent prices sort of leveling out and in fact going down in recent months due to recent immigration policies. You have far fewer illegal immigrants competing for the same houses. Obviously, the prices are going to go down. I'm not pro current immigration policy, but it does say something about the status quo and the current housing crisis. If we're just talking about current immigration policy, good or bad, like on balance, absolutely bad. But the point here is that there are causes other than institutional investors that are causing the crisis. And then finally, who is this? Turpin 22 talks about an all-of-the-above approach that's really needed for such a complex issue. Quote, there are many ways to address this issue. Finding success using these methods will almost certainly take an all-of-the-above approach. To begin, zoning laws must be changed. Changes such as allowing accessory dwelling units and single-room occupancy residences would also help. Cities should work to limit the effect of investors. Okay, it's one of many factors. Again, none of these policies will be enough on their own. So, again, if AF thinks we're about to solve housing, they got another thing coming. The simple policy litmus test that Applebaum 126 proposes, quote, here's a litmus test that you can use anytime politicians say they have an idea to make housing more affordable. Will it result in more construction? It only helps if the answer is yes. Does AF help, or does AF result in more construction? What do you think? You take the money out of an industry, is that industry going to grow? I guess that's my question. Next part of this is simple scapegoating. So a couple cards talk about how we have this housing crisis. It's easy to pick a villain. There's been a bunch of villains we've kind of cycled through. Institutional investors, landlords, they're just the latest one. Demsis 23, quote, in reporting on the housing crisis, I often hear some version of a simple story purporting to explain why so many Americans struggle to afford a place to live. The story goes like this. Housing costs are unaffordable because insert bad company here is greedy and jacking up prices. The villain can be Airbnb or developers. It can be deep-pocketed foreigners or iBuyers. The latest version of the housing villain story targets private equity firms and hedge funds, broadly institutional investors, that have supposedly been outcompeting regular home buyers and are therefore responsible for the skyrocketing rent and home prices. Private equity isn't the first villain, and it likely won't be the last, and to be cast in the role of the housing scapegoat. Airbnb, foreign buyers, greedy developers, all of these groups have taken center stage and probably will again. Nobody needs to defend these entities, but playing whack-a-mole with the villain of the moment won't increase the amount of affordable housing we build. Don't let make-believe villains distract you from the real solutions to the housing crisis. We have to build, end quote. Second source says essentially the same thing in other words, although I love the writing from Demsis. Green Hut 126, quote, pick a villain and blame it for a real problem, even though it is a minor, if not totally insignificant player in causing it. It may be satisfying to blame big housing for affordability problems, but usually the answer lies in the much harder and mundane work of implementing sensible regulatory reforms. And then, as we touched on before, another issue with trying to solve it in this way by regulating companies is that we crystallize the market by not banning ownership and having companies divest from their properties, but only banning acquisition. So ownership is allowed, existing market stays put, companies never sell their homes, and nobody can get into the market. A potential market implication of AF. Next, let's talk about supply. So if everyone agrees in the literature, the major issue with the housing crisis is we don't have enough homes, we don't have enough supply. What's going to fix supply? Investors are going to fix supply. Applebaum 26. The deep pockets of institutional investors aren't just providing more options for renters. They're also providing a fresh source of capital for home builders. Companies can sell excess inventory to rental companies, which allows them to build more aggressively. end quote. In fact, Airman24 goes even larger and says that institutional investors uniquely solve the housing crisis, the very institutions that AF absolutely is trying to ban. Quote, right now, the only market segment capable of filling the gap of industry at scale is large institutional landlords. If legislators block this source of new housing, the results may be too tragic to contemplate. Too tragic to contemplate. Policymakers should think long and hard about the consequences of banning this one remaining source of housing. The increasingly visible homeless encampments in our most expensive cities are just the tip of the iceberg. Americans are burdened by the lack of housing. It is imperative that we stem these trends, end quote. One of these sources of how we get more homes on the market is the build to rent model, where you build homes in order to rent them out. It's a good name. It's a good name for what it is. Goldman and Zinn talk about housing crisis solvency based on supplying the build-to-rent homes that can close the supply-demand gap that we have right now. We have a lot of demand, not enough supply. Quote, BTR homes also offer an additional disposition strategy for home builders who can continue to build homes during periods of economic uncertainty. This gives the builder an additional outlet for the properties and reduces the risk, which enables home builders to continue to build in economic environments with high or fluctuating interest rates, end quote. And to that end, they've built 140,000 homes in the last 10-ish years, et al. 825. And if you say, okay, but we're building, we're not acquiring them, this isn't topical. No, we're acquiring them. There are a number of models that BTR builders use to build home between the builder and the renter, those two companies, how they work together. But the main one is by the builder focuses on building, the renter focuses on managing the property, so they just buy it from the builder. That's acquisition. Quote, the partnership model is most often struck between an SFR investor and a builder. The builder typically buys the land and then partners with the SFR investor. The SFR investor agrees to buy the completed development at a preset price, end quote. So the AF team will decimate the build to rent model, which is, usually based on acquisition. Another thing that these institutional home builders do, so we already talked about the fact that they build in poor neighborhoods, they buy houses in poor neighborhoods, working class neighborhoods, places with a lot of renters perhaps, and places where the people who would buy the homes just can't qualify for a mortgage, frankly, since the 2008 financial crisis. And some of these homes, especially if they're cheaper, depending on the neighborhoods, you can just imagine they're in rough shape. And that's mostly actually what these institutional investors go after, is they go after like bad properties no one really wants to buy. They can buy them super cheap, fix them up, put them back on the market, rent them out or sell them. That's, they're not all being, this is another big point that I probably should have emphasized further earlier on, but a lot of these institutional investors, they're flipping houses. They're not just renting them out. They're not just buying to rent, they're buying to sell after fixing them up. So that's like a pretty large portion of this is rather than thinking about them as like corporate landlords, it's like they're corporate property improvers. The condition of the housing stock overall improves drastically with them in the picture because they're able to make money off of fixing houses. So then you go out in your neighborhoods and all the houses look nice now in some of these neighborhoods because these institutional investors have got into them. So Goldman and Golding, 2021, institutional investors often buy houses in need of repair and refurbish them, thus increasing the quality. They can often do this at scale, by the way. If they do this with 100 properties, they're going to get much lower costs on labor and supplies, materials, than if you were just a single home buyer trying to fix up a house you just bought. Like, you don't know those people, you don't have the connections, you don't have the economy of scale, you don't have warehouses. These big institutions are able to get much lower price and all that thing. So that's how they make money. So again, Goldman and Golding says between $20,000 and $40,000 on average is invested by institutional investors into homes. Even smaller mid-sized investors are more likely to purchase homes in need of repairs than owner-occupants. So just again, in general, a lot of them are not competing for the same properties. Mostly owner-occupants, you go to buy a house, you don't want a house that you have to put a bunch of homework into, Like, you don't want a project, you just want a place to live. You don't want a bunch of broken things. That's not what you're looking for. But that is what these investors are looking for. What's more, this investment actually helps to stabilize distressed housing markets. So the neighborhood goes down, the prices go down, anyone with money gets out of the neighborhood, it just keeps tanking. The institutional investors come in and start buying the houses. Suddenly there's a market, people can sell the houses become more valuable. It kind of can turn neighborhoods around in this way. And obviously with fixing up the houses, there's a lot more curb appeal, broken windows, policy, psychology kind of a thing. So overall, like if you live in a really bad neighborhood and you want to turn it around, probably the best thing you can do is hope an investor comes and starts buying up houses. That's probably the best thing for the neighborhood. Finally, talking about renters and apartment dwellers. So this topic really moralizes in a lot of ways the dream of living in a single family home. It's like you are poor, and in order to get to the middle class, you have to buy a single family home and live in it. That's what it means. If you just keep living in an apartment, you're poor, sorry. If you continue renting, you're poor, sorry. What if you want to rent? You're poor. What if you want to live in an apartment? You're poor. The only way to be successful, to make progress in life, is to purchase a single family residential home to live in. So, talking about renting first, there's many reasons you want to rent. By the way, I'm filming this in a rented apartment, which I very much do enjoy, by the way. Many reasons to rent. So you don't want the responsibility of, fixing things. Mostly fixing things. Things break down, you got to fix them in a house. Can cost a lot of money. Like imagine replacing a roof, replacing a furnace, replacing a driveway, dealing with lawn maintenance. I mean, sometimes I look at homeowners and it seems like a full-time job, just taking care of the house. A lot of you live in single-family homes and your parents maybe put in a lot of work into their home, and you just sign up for that when you're a homeowner. Like, what if you want to do things other than babying your home? What else? They want flexibility. So if you're only living somewhere for a short time, it doesn't really make sense to buy. And then the last big one, you can't get access to a mortgage. You have poor credit, so you actually don't have that option, and renting just makes sense. Fairweather24, quote, "Not everyone wants to own a home. Many people prefer to rent, and renters require landlords, whether corporate or individual, and whether of apartments or single-family homes." So that's the moralization of renting. Fairweather24, moralization of single-family homes. Oh, very interesting. So, again, I live in an apartment building. This is an apartment building, and super interesting. If you go to a residential neighborhood, you find a house, you can rent the house or you can buy the house. You buy the house or you rent the house. This is a huge building. There's a hotel. You stay in the hotel room, I guess. You rent an apartment. There's other apartments on the top of this building that are maybe a bit nicer that you can actually own them. You can buy the apartment and you can live in the apartment. And it's your apartment. You got to pay some building fees, obviously, but yeah, it's your apartment. You can kind of do what you want with it. They don't call them apartments. They call them condos. They are condos, not apartments, because this is the way that they need to split apart the difference in why owning is a better thing. It's the same thing, but owning is a better thing. It's a condo. It's the same thing. It's the same building. It's a condo. Renting apartment. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, the idea that the language we use shapes our thoughts and our perceptions of the world. The classic example is you meet a woman, she's Miss or Mrs. Is Mrs. Smith or Miss Smith? Because it's very important if a woman is married or not. That's a very important thing. You need to know, can you date this woman? So you gotta know, is it Miss or Mrs.? You meet a man, it's just Mr. Smith. It's not important if he's married or not. We don't gotta have that information in our language. And so you grow up speaking the English language and your brain naturally just assumes that, of course, it's very important if a woman is married or not. And who cares if a man is married or not? It's not important because it's built into our language, right? And so we have the same thing around single-family homes. Yeah, I just thought of that. I thought it was fascinating. But yeah, again, I love living in an apartment. I've got neighbors that are super cool. There's facilities that are super nice. I don't have a lawn to mow. It's really ideal. It's real. I might buy a condo at some point, but I don't know if I'll ever buy a single family home. But that's what is, again, moralized. So Harrigus 24, we shouldn't single out single family residences for housing reform. Any reform that will help renters should also include multifamily homes like apartment buildings. Quote, one of the deep-seated causes of the housing crisis is the cultural and legal primacy that the American housing system gives to single-family detached houses. Measures that would crack down specifically on a source of single-family rental homes look problematic. Rental homes are still homes. Concerns about the exploitative nature of large corporate landlords are valid, but coming from policymakers, it would ring true to me if equally applied to the corporate owners of multifamily housing. So, moralization of these things. Access to neighborhoods is another big reason you might rent. So many renters are unable to afford homes in certain neighborhoods, and AF would punish those renters. So again, Applebaum 26, tight credit standards mean that millions of Americans can no longer obtain loans to purchase homes. Institutional landlords allow people to live in the same places, but as renters. You want to live in that neighborhood, the bank won't let you, no problem, just rent. Stringham 126, I love this. I personally have benefited from private equity firms investing in housing on more than one occasion. When I moved to Hartford 18 years ago, I did not want to pony up a few $100,000 for a home when I was unsure where I wanted to live. Instead, I had the benefit of interacting with a Boston-based private equity firm that had gathered institutional money and built the tallest residential building in Connecticut. All I had to do was show up with a 1-month rent deposit. I was always grateful for the private equity firm, and at the beginning of each month, I would write them a thank you card in the form of my rent. I, the paying customer, benefited them, and the private equity funded landlord who fronted all of the costs benefited me. Denying the idea that investments can be mutually beneficial for investors and consumers is entering momdami territory. Don't want to enter that. Another huge reason it would be good to get into certain markets. It's still in the access to neighborhoods, just about high quality education. Public schools in America, it depends on where you live. If you live in the district with a high quality school, you can go to the school. So what if you can't afford a house in the high quality neighborhood? You can rent in the high quality neighborhood, get access to the high quality school, thus your kids get better education, and you just rent. You're kind of buying your way into higher quality education. I'm not saying that's how our education system should work, but it is. And so this gives actual people better opportunities, right? Quote, access to those schools often requires homeownership, which requires a down payment and mortgage qualification that many working families cannot afford. Alternatively, paying a security deposit and signing a 1-year lease are far more attainable. End quote. All right. I would say, regardless of how these debates turn out, regardless of how confused or frustrated or whatever other emotions you're feeling about the topic, hopefully you just have complete clarity and think I'm a nutcase for even bringing up all of this thing and obsessing and agonizing about the topic. I hope someone has an answer, because I sure don't. But regardless of all this, I think that's a really, really good topic, very good for just being educated on. And I hope this lecture helped you to at least get some ideas rolling around in your head about sort of the state of housing in America, some ways to solve it, how we got here, and just some other nice little thoughts on housing. So very happy to end my debate career talking about this topic. And once again, thank you all for joining me in so many Debatetrack videos. It has been an absolute honor. Every time I get a nice comment that says thank you, I just think, geez, I am so honored. I'm truly so grateful to be able to make these videos for so long. And I also really, really look forward to the upcoming lectures from Catherine, who I think, she's just the most accomplished debater you could possibly ask for, and coach you could possibly ask for to be doing these. There's no one on the planet who's as qualified to do them. And having met with her and talked to her, she's like really fantastic. And I will continue to watch these lectures alongside you. And I will see you down in the comments of future videos. So again, enjoy the housing topic or don't. Have a wonderful, beautiful month, and tune in next time for Catherine's lecture on the next topic. Farewell.